Good evening. I'm Augie Napoli. I'm President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Cleveland, and I welcome you to our fourth session of the 2022 Community Conversations. I particularly want to say a special welcome to our listeners, but also to our viewers as well. This evening is the first viewing telecast that we have had with Community Conversations, and we're thrilled to bring this to you from the United Way of Greater Cleveland's Studio 107 right here at 1331 Euclid Avenue. Now, I think you all know, but it bears repeating, that the objective of these conversations is to provide a forum to raise awareness and increase engagement on important topics for our community. A series like this comes together with a great deal of help, and we have many organizations to thank. Tonight's discussion is co-sponsored by our friends at the YWCA of Greater Cleveland, and I want to thank Helen Forbes-Field, its new president and CEO, and the team there at the YWCA for your partnership in this important conversation. I'd also like to thank Rockwell International, their automation, for supporting and making this series possible. Thank you to IdeaStream Public Media and to the City Club of Cleveland and WOVU for their support. And thank you to our community partners for their support throughout this series. Tonight's topic is voting rights, redistricting, and impact on voter turnout. We have a panel of local experts here to discuss the status of Ohio's redistricting process this election year, as well as the impact on the present district maps in Northeast Ohio and fair and equitable representation. We are privileged to have Nick Castell as our moderator this evening. Nick is a producer, journalist, and reporter for IdeaStream Public Media, covering politics, government, and many other critical issues in Northeast Ohio. So without further ado, I say thank you and welcome again, and I'm honored to introduce tonight's conversation moderator, Nick Castell.
Thank you very much, Augie, for the introduction, and thank you to the United Way of Greater Cleveland for hosting this series of events and for having us here to have this conversation. We also want to thank IdeaStream Public Media, WOVU 95.9 FM, and the City Club of Cleveland, who will be live streaming tonight's conversation. So that everyone understands how we'll interact as a community this evening, we want to begin with questions that I've prepared for our panel here. We'll be talking here until about 6:45, when we will turn things over to a public question and answer session. There we'll have questions from the community, which we will hear and answer, and as I share them with our panel. And you can start asking your general questions at any time during this evening's program, and we will make every attempt to get all of those questions answered. The way you can ask questions is by texting them to 216-307-5632. That's 216-307-5632. In less than 50 days, 47 days to be exact, on November 8th, voters will pick a senator, a governor, a chief justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, a Cuyahoga County executive, and a slew of other candidates up and down the ticket. How many people will show up after what's been a confusing year of redistricting fights and a special primary election remains an open question, and one I hope we can get to tonight. We're joined today by a panel of engaged citizens who will talk about these issues and will help you, our community, exercise your right at the ballot box. So tonight we're joined by Erica Anthony, who is the executive director of Cleveland Votes, which is a nonpartisan democracy-building movement that works to reconstruct and strengthen power through active participation. State Representative Juanita Brent is in her second term as a legislator in the Ohio House of Representatives. She represents District 12 and currently serves as ranking member of the Agriculture and Conservation Committee, while also serving on the Transportation and Public Safety and Commerce and Labor Committees. In addition, she's the first vice president of the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus. We're happy to have you here. Crystal Bryant currently serves as the executive director for the Cleveland branch of the NAACP. She prides herself in working hard and boldly stepping into work that others may stray from. Thank you for boldly stepping onto this panel And Aaron Ackerman is Executive Director of the Ohio Association of Election Officials. Thank you also for being here. I want to start our conversation by talking about redistricting, which I know has been a very confusing topic, I think, for a lot of voters, people who've been trying to follow the news of lawsuits and legislative fights over just how these state and congressional districts will be drawn. Erica, if you wouldn't mind taking the first stab at this, would you be able to explain, in your view, ultimately what do these redistricting changes mean for voters?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I agree with you on your point about the confusion. I think particularly in the last couple of years, not just here in the state of Ohio, but across our nation, we've been saddled with a lot of dis and misinformation, which leaves voters and even non-voters confused about what they should be advocating for, what they should be turning up to the polls for. And we have been victim to that this year, particularly here in the state of Ohio, and I know State Rep Juanita Brent can speak to that as well. But ultimately, it's about fair and just representation. A couple of years ago, voters across this state voted to ensure that we would have an equitable process to ensure that we could decide what our legislative maps would be. And over the course of this year, there have been challenges, I will say, in making sure that that process was conducted and ultimately played out in a fair and equitable way. There have been a number of nonpartisan groups across the state of Ohio that have been advocating really tirelessly to ensure that the folks that are ultimately in charge of making this decision follow the rules, follow the ethics that should be following behind these processes. But what has happened is that we've had things like 2 primary elections, communicating to individuals who, unlike the folks here on the stage with me who probably wake up and think about these types of issues on a daily basis, trying to communicate to the community at large why they need to show up not just in May, but guess what, bring your kids to school and also, make sure you're at the polls in August. I know for our organization and many of the organizations that we work with here in the city of Cleveland has been tremendously difficult to communicate, particularly when we're being almost like an avalanche of information that is not always clear what is factual and what is not factual.
And Aaron, if I could bring you into this conversation, you work with boards of elections all over the state, the folks who are actually printing the ballots, mailing them out, counting the votes. What has this redistricting fight meant for the workers who are trying to administer this election?
Sure. Well, most notably, Nick, the second primary this year, that is a completely unprecedented event. We have never in the history of our state had more than 2 statewide elections in a year or had more than 1 primary in a year statewide. And so it's just been a continuous election cycle, I guess. We kind of started voting really back in April and really haven't stopped since. So it's been stressful for sure for my folks, but they're working hard. We're 47 days out, as you said, so we actually start voting tomorrow. But yeah, they've handled it well. But it's been stressful, and we've just done our best to make the most of the situation and try to make sure that we hold 3 really good elections this year.
And on that point, we start voting tomorrow. Those are the overseas ballots, right?
That
so
is,
people who
yes,
are in military service or otherwise out of the country, that's when they can start voting.
That's correct.
Got it. Well, could you just stick with you for a second? Do you have like an elevator pitch or some way that you try to explain to the public, to voters, what happened this year with redistricting and what is going to be on their ballot in November? And what's up with these lines? Are they going to stay the way they are, or are they going to change again?
Well, to answer the second question first, they are going to change again because according to our state courts, we still have unconstitutional districts, meaning that the Redistricting Commission will have to go back to work, presumably sometime early next year, and redraw the lines in time for the 2024 election. So we will be voting with this set of lines in 2022, but there will be new sets presumably for 2024.
But the important point for people, too, is that there will be an election November 8th. This is not being postponed, and we do have lines, at least for this election.
For 2022, we are set for now, yes.
Set for now. State Representative Juanita Brent, you got to watch all of this play out in the State House. How do you talk with your constituents about what the redistricting process means for them?
Well, it's really, we're all learning and seeing what's in the process together. When we pass these different issues, what people expected and what people voted for is not what exactly was happening. There were certain deadlines that were supposed to occur, and that did not happen. So you're seeing a lot of people breaking the rules, and it's hard to explain to people in your district What happens to people when they break the rules? Normally when people break rules, there are consequences. The consequences have fallen on the people that are all throughout Ohio, and that's with these two different primaries, and people are looking for results to say this redistricting process was supposed to be done in September of 2021, and it didn't get done completely, well, not really completely, until May of 2022. So people are saying, well, what's the consequence? Who's going to be held responsible for these two different primaries, the $25 million? And that's really hard to really give them a straight answer of how the consequences are going to fall down, except for the people are paying for it with two different primaries.
How much did your district change in this process?
90% of my district is brand new.
Could you explain, like, what's that like as an elected official, as a candidate on the ballot, when suddenly you have a whole new group of voters you've got to introduce yourself to?
It was not a long time frame at all. I'm literally, if you look at the map, my district is drawn around my house, my physical house. And my neighbors who are a couple doors down are not in my district. We live on the same street and it's broken up like that. So how do you explain to somebody that this is fair when you live in the same community where I live in Lee Harvard, but you can be 4 doors down from me and not be in the same district?
And is that frustrating or confusing at all for people you know who maybe look to you for constituent services because you are their state rep?
Yes, and you never stop being anybody's state rep. I don't care who you are in the state of Ohio. You represent everyone with their making sure you serve well. But this voter confusion is leading to voter suppression. And when people feel like they're being disenfranchised within their community, it gives people almost like an excuse not to want to show up at the polls.
Well, we've touched on it a little bit, but these districts that we're currently working with in the state legislative level were set despite rulings by the Ohio Supreme Court that these were unconstitutional. However, there was a federal court that essentially set the stage for these maps being used this time. Crystal, do you see this redistricting fight as being over? Do you think it's going to continue?
It'll continue as long as we have political parties who both tend to utilize it as an opportunity for them to do the things that they need to do to push their party forward. It will absolutely continue. For the people, though, as just State Rep Brent just kind of stated, we use at the NAACP, we use it as an opportunity to really kind of push and promote what does it look like to create equitable democracy? And how do you power build from the ground up? And understanding what is within your power. And even though we went to the polls and we voted for one thing and they did another, you don't stop fighting. And generally, when you are in the NAACP fighting for something called equity, that means this is a marathon fight. It never ends, and you have to be more proactive and understanding how you strengthen yourself and democracy and how do you get what you want by collectively responding and always having a strategy for the things that represents what will free you and provide equity and equality.
Do you have, when you look at this redistricting fight, do you have an outcome that you would like to see?
I would like people to follow the rules, right? We voted for something, and this is what we want as a people, as a constituent, as a citizen. And whether or not, the outcome is favorable to what you want personally, we should all understand that democracy in itself is on the line here in the United States of America. It hasn't been around that long. This is a very young country, and if we don't follow the rules, we may be doomed. So I would love to see the outcome of us going along with what it is that we voted for, rather or not I personally benefit for something or not.
When you say follow the rules, you're talking about follow the process set out by this voter
Absolutely.
referendum from a number of years ago, the constitutional amendment. Well, Aaron, this is maybe a technical question, but just, on the basic level of figuring out what district voters are in, like how do election officials do that, especially on a short timeline?
Oh, how long is this program again? It is, well, technical is the correct word. At a very high level, it involves receiving maps and what are called shape files. And once the Board of Elections receive that, we're then able to see exactly how the lines are drawn. We then plug that into a couple of our election systems, including our voter registration system, so that voters get assigned to the correct precincts, so that they're in the correct districts, so they can vote on the correct candidates. It also involves then all of our petitions and making sure that we understand where the district lines are, so when people come in and file, we know that the people that have signed their petitions, in fact, live in their districts as well, and we create a ballot that is accurate, and then that ballot goes to the correct locations. So there's a whole host of work. It takes counties, we were pressed very hard this year, as Representative Brent knows, Cuyahoga County, it took them every bit of 2 to 3 weeks once we had those maps just to go through all of the back-end IT stuff that we needed to do to get those maps ready for prime time and for people to vote.
And Erica, when you talk with voters and you try to, get people engaged with the voting process, are there any particular points that often come up when you're talking about redistricting? I mean, are people typically confused about one thing or another?
Yeah, I mean, I think through the points that were made by my fellow panelists, I think the underlying challenge is about trust, right? I agree with Crystal on the point of just follow the rules, right? I mean, these are basic habits that we were taught in kindergarten, right? And when we don't see those carried out with efficacy by those that individuals have elected to office, it really diminishes the amount of trust that voters have as it relates to not just this process, but other processes. How can we ensure that they have the confidence that they can move forward and cast their ballot and not feel like something's going to go awry? So it is a very complicated conversation. Nick, you are aware of research that Cleveland Votes, along with Policy Matters Ohio, conducted last year, where we were examining the civic motivation, lack thereof, of Clevelanders, and one of the top lines from our polling and from our focus groups included the fact that folks are not apathetic. They lack trust in those that have power to make decisions. So as advocates, as democracy builders in our region, it makes it really hard for us to communicate effectively to ensure that folks have the confidence that they can show up and cast their ballot and know that it's going to be followed through in a way that leads to the result that it should lead to.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that survey because that was something I wanted to get to. And this was last year. This was a survey of people who are non-voters or infrequent voters, which is unusual because usually the people polled are the likely voters because those are the ones candidates are trying to sway. One interesting thing to me about that survey was, like you said, the takeaway was just because someone doesn't vote all that much, it doesn't mean they don't care about their community, they don't care about their neighborhood, they've got issues they care about. It's just about believing that voting will make a difference. How do you have that conversation with people?
Yeah, well, I think one, we need to expand our imagination about what is democracy, right? Voting is an act of, your citizenry and the way that you can exercise your civic participation, but there are a multitude of other ways that people can activate in their community. And as Crystal said, we are a very young country in the grand scheme of things. So we need to push the boundaries beyond, yes, we encourage, obviously Cleveland Votes is in our title, people to cast their ballot, but we also exercise and engage folks in our community in other forms of civic participation and democracy building. So we have to make it habitual, right? It's not something that, oh, snap, it's election day, I gotta go downtown or I gotta go to the precinct, in my neighborhood. You don't want people to dread it. You want people to celebrate it. This week is National Voter Registration Day week, and we are literally #celebrating democracy. Despite maybe some of the chaos and some of the challenges that we're facing, there are acts of celebration and pride that many members of our community have. We've seen it happen all week. We see it happen all throughout the year. So we have to expand the definition of what civic participation is. And part of that, it's like a toolbox, right? It's like part of your toolbox includes voting, but there are other ways to engage.
Mm-hmm. And Juanita, you just this year were elected executive vice chair of the County Democratic Party. You've got a new role here, and one of the jobs that you've got to do within the party is work to engage with voters and get people out to vote. In your experience, does it seem like voters are really paying attention to the elections this year?
People are disgusted. Some people are feeling like their vote will not count. Some people were very confused. And I feel as though as an elected official, all of us are to blame for what's going on right now within our community. Because even if I didn't directly allow it, we have a system that is not functioning on behalf of the people. And this is the results of this, where people do not feel engaged, to feel like the system is working on their behalf. So we have to do better for those who are in places to lead, like myself, to make sure that people feel engaged, they want to show up. And I think part of it is that when people look outside of their direct communities, they don't see any change. So when people say, oh, we don't see people voting, it's like people are looking at the direct change within their direct community. Has the streets been paved? Did the garbage get picked up? Did their schools get any better? And they're just adding this more of just voter confusion going on. with the lack of leadership.
And is there anything that you try to do when you're talking with voters to convince them that it is worth showing up? What's the case for showing up to vote, even if you have your questions or concerns about whether your vote is going to make a difference in the reality you see outside your front door every day?
I always start with the basic comment. I tell people, you pay my salary. Your taxes literally pay my salary. And so if you are concerned about where your money is going, you need to show up. If you do not like what I'm doing or what somebody else is doing, you pay all of our salaries. Get rid of us. You are our boss. So that's what people have to remember. And I think sometimes people forget that in the midst of just living their lives, that they are all of our bosses. And if all of our bosses get in a room and say that they do not want us, then that's time we leave, and that's what the election is. So people have to remember they have so much more control if they work like a fist and not a bunch of fingers to make things happen within our communities.
And a reminder to all of you tuning in, listening in whatever form you are, we want you to be a part of this conversation. We will be going to a question and answer session in about 15, 20 minutes or so we want to bring you into this soon. Start thinking about what questions you might want to bring to our panelists, and you can text them to 216-307-5632, 216-307-5632. We just mentioned before that this is National Voter Registration Day was this week, and we're celebrating it all week. Aaron, would you be able to walk us through some of the basics here, and Erica, you as well? How do you just help people make sure they know, like, how are they registered to vote? Where do you go? What district are you in? What's the best advice?
I'll start and certainly welcome Erica's thoughts. A couple things. Number one, your Board of Elections, your local Board of Elections is always going to be a great resource for you. We try to be very active both on the web and through social media, and certainly there are lots of phone lines at your Board of Elections. So if you have questions, you can go to their website, you can check your status of your registration, you can contact them by phone, you can email them, and someone there will be delighted to help make sure that you are in fact registered, and if you're not, walk you through that process. Secondly, and it's sad I have to add this, but unfortunately there's so much misinformation and disinformation that's going on right now that I would encourage people, unless the information is coming from a trusted source, one of these community groups, you do want to go to a trusted source to verify any information you're receiving about your election at this point, including the status of your registration. If someone approaches you and says you're registered and you don't know who that person is, I would unfortunately advise you to be a little skeptical at this point and reach out to those people that you do trust to make sure that you're good to go for November.
Erica?
Yeah, I would just add to that point about the mis and disinformation. We were tabling an event this past weekend, and I had an individual come up because they were asking about something they received in the mail that they thought looked suspicious. And again, it just adds to, the layers of challenge for groups that are trustworthy and, really trying to promote the factual websites like our Board of Election or the Secretary of State's website. So I agree, going to here, if you're in Cuyahoga County, 443-VOTE, that's both the website as well as the phone number. Our particular Board of Election recently updated their website. Shout out to them. I think it is incredibly even more user-friendly for individuals. The navigation, I think, is much more efficient, but really you can go there and get all the critical information. We always encourage people to verify their voter registration status, even if you have been a consistent voter. So if you are 65 years old and you have been voting since you were 18, you just don't know, and we really encourage people to verify their registration. Download your sample ballot. This is not a pop quiz, right? No one's going to be, asking you when you get to the poll, what's going on. So I know for me, particularly with some of the judicial candidates, that I may not be as well versed in, having that sample ballot to be able to do the research, or if there's a particular ballot initiative on your ballot, having that in advance is really important. And then, we always encourage folks to make a plan. There are 3 ways you can cast your ballot. You can do it absentee, vote by mail. We started using vote from home during the pandemic as a catchphrase. You can go early to your local Board of Elections or Election Day. And it may seem simple to say make a plan, but we're all very busy. We have families, we have work. Something may come up on Election Day. So really thinking and being proactive about how you're going to cast your ballot. We think early voting is like the way to go, because I know I've done it. and you can literally go down to 30th and Chester, and sometimes you're in and out in 3 minutes. So just really proactively thinking about how you're going to cast your ballot is important.
Well, Crystal, what work are you and the NAACP doing in preparation for Election Day? Is there anything that you're really focused on right now?
Sure. So we are currently building capacity, and what that means is, while we work for a legacy organization, it may seem like you are working with tons of staff, but that is not the case, Nick. It is myself and one other young lady, and so we have to have vision in order to be able to execute some of these things. We were really fortunate to partner with the Social Justice Institute this calendar year. It provided a legal fellow for us, and we were able to lay out something called the Black Voter Initiative. The first component of the Black Voter Initiative was really to be able to call of our local elected officials to the table and kind of lay out an agenda for them in 4 priority areas, including voter engagement and civic engagement, as well as criminal justice reform, environmental injustice, and also some other different policy things, including economic injustice and closing the racial wealth gap. So we don't want to make the mistake of assuming that our local elected officials all know what the state of Black Cleveland is, because they represent everyone, not just African Americans and other folk in the BIPOC community. And so after that education session, we even left them with information about where they can find sample policies, where they can find data readily available for them when they make decisions. And then the second opportunity from that is to be able to create what we call an initiative around a report card, a nice scorecard that we've never had before. And so we've created a scorecard that ultimately rates candidates on how they view equity, racial equity specifically, and also what have they done if they are already in an elected seat in terms of racial equity. So it goes a little bit beyond, I support you, you're great, we love Black people. And it kind of holds their feet to the fire about what they're actually doing in this particular space. We'll publicize that scorecard. Because we lack capacity this particular year, it'll only go out for the executives. I actually sent it out this morning. We hope that both candidates are responsive. And then once we receive it, we'll actually publicize that report card. And the last component of it, I was actually just sharing with Erica a few minutes ago. This morning, I received information that we will receive a grant from Black Voters Matter, and that will allow us to kind of fuel some organizers. And so in terms of door-to-door organizing, it may seem like it's such an old concept, but believe it or not, based off the study from Cleveland Votes, it's actually what works. People think it's all about social media, but it really is trusted sources. And who are your trusted sources? Your neighbor, right? Your friend that you know every single day, versus a whole bunch of hodgepodge and things that are confusing. And so we want to go back to that really old school way of engaging folk, but not talking about necessarily political party, but this is the state of your community. And these particular areas, this is how you connect to it. This is the result of it. And then here's the opportunity for you to do something about it. So we'll utilize all that information from the scorecard, as well as the information from the 2-page document that we put out to legislators, combine that into content to begin to do some door knocking, and then also some get out to vote efforts where we're using just texting, because everybody has their phone. We never miss with the phone.
So it's the county executive candidates, they'll be on the scorecard.
Oh, yes, they will.
They're on notice.
Yeah, they're on notice. I mean, the county executive is a big role. I think because it's a new form of government, I don't think the community necessarily understands how important it is, how much power is in a role, and what it means for the residents and constituency of Cuyahoga County. So it's really, really important that our next county executive understand what the state of Black Cleveland looks like, especially because there's been so much discussion from both candidates around equity and what they want to do to support minorities.
I'm curious on that point, like how do you make sure that candidates are really answering the questions that you're asking, giving you something that feels substantive and satisfactory that candidates can act on, rather than just saying, oh yeah, I believe in equity, I believe in that, sure.
So we didn't, one thing I don't believe in doing is like reinventing a wheel, right? And so something may be new to Cleveland, but not new. We were able to find other local NAACPs across the United States. We have 1,200 branches. We've been around for 113 years that have done some work in this space already. And so we examined their particular type of questions about the level of training that one has received, the type of education, the type of things already that a candidate or a person has already invested in their time. And so we rate those things on a scale of 1 to 10. We'll use our political action committee, and we also had to make sure that we went to the law to make sure we're being fair and nonpartisan and all that good stuff. So when you see it, we also have, our fellow was amazing. She also did a white paper that kind of breaks down how we came to the conclusion and how we created it, and we'd be happy to share.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. That sounds really interesting. And a reminder, if you would like to join this conversation, start thinking about your questions. You can text them to 216-307-5632, 216-307-5632. Representative Juanita Brent, I know we were talking earlier about misinformation, spreading maybe on social media, people just coming up with incorrect, misconceptions of what might be going on politically or how to vote. Do you run into that a lot when you're talking with people?
Yes, I run into that a lot, very often. I spend a lot of time just walking in communities. I spent some time yesterday in Berea walking through the communities, knocking on doors, and the first thing someone asked me is, what are you going to do about keeping our borders safe? And I was like, well, we don't do that at the State House. And so sometimes there's a miscommunication of what each level of government does. There's a miscommunication about what to be expected in these upcoming elections. There's a lot of miscommunication because people have when it comes to their sources of information. So we always have to, a lot of times, redirect people to those trusted sources about who's going to be on the ballot. And just a small plug, we really need to bring government class back into a lot of our schools, because that is the one key thing that's really missing when it comes to people really understanding what each level of government does. And that will help really kind of deter some of these questions that are being received about who is going to be on the ballot and what is their role within government.
Yeah, I think, covering the Cleveland mayor's race last year, I think people have an idea of what a mayor of a city does. If something goes wrong in the city, it's the mayor's fault. People may not know what a county executive does. I don't know that I can give you a good description of what the day-to-day job is like. Do you think that people understand what a state representative does?
No.
How do you explain it? Like, how do you explain this is my daily job?
So I always explain it as we do two things. We bring money from the State House to the local community, and we develop laws that affect the entire state. And I could go into more details about it, but I always keep it as very basic as that. And then I always tell people say, well, where does the money go? Because if you guys are bringing home all this money, I didn't get any money in my pocket. And I said, well, and I was like, we give money when it comes to public transit. We give money when it comes to our local universities, our schools, our libraries, our bridges, our roads. If you have just gone down Valley View Bridge and you were looking at the construction, that is the money that we have given to the state, to our communities regarding Valley View Bridge. If you send your children to public schools, then that is the money that the state sends to you. If you go to a local university and you're wondering how does your library stay open so late, because we are the one fitting the bill for that too. So it's so many things that the state is responsible for, but people have to know that they have a role in letting us know where that money needs to go during the operating budget, which is the largest budget we have, and then also our smaller budget, which is the capital budget. But just having those conversations, just yesterday, I literally spent 30 minutes standing and talking to, two frequent voters, but they had no idea what a state rep or a state senator does.
Crystal, if I could go back to you for a second, when you were talking before about knocking on doors, trying to reach voters, I know one issue that came up in the mayor's race last year is that people who vote in municipal elections tend to be the ones who vote the most frequently, tend to be older. I think the average age is something like late 50s, early 60s of folks who are reliable voters in mayor's races in Cleveland. Are you doing anything to try to engage with younger voters to make sure that they have an opportunity to, have their voices be heard?
So we have a youth council, but if I'm being honest, and I'm always honest, Nick, we are still in the rebuilding phase. So unfortunately, we don't have capacity right now to engage youth. And as we get new leadership in, those are one of the priority areas. But ultimately, how I look at it when people contact us is we are all collaborative partners. And one of the things that Cleveland Votes does as a funder, their reach is much deeper because they have the ability to widen their audience in terms of what nonprofits you're going to fund that supports that particular target population. So generally, if we get calls like that and we're not able to support it, I punt it back to my sister to the left, see if she has organizations that is working with that population, because we're much stronger together. How do I need to phrase it? Not coming in as fingers, but coming in as a fist.
Right. Well, Erica, are there any particular misconceptions about voting in elections that you think are important to clear up that you've run into a lot?
I actually really want to elevate what Representative Brent just said about the translation of our civics or our ability to have civics in our class or in our classrooms. I think not to reveal my age, but there was a time when it was mandatory, and that is not the case, I would say, globally across the United States. And what we often hear in conversation is that, yes, I learned about the three branches of government. However, how does that translate to my life, right? And in many ways, that is how Cleveland Votes, we see ourselves as translators, because so many people have not been given and or afforded the opportunity to really see the ways in which the judicial branch impacts their life, the executive branch impacts their life. We actually contracted with Cleveland Documenters earlier this year in support of our strategic plan to have conversations with residents, and that was a huge through line in what we heard, what they heard back, was that we're not creating safe, non-polarizing spaces to converse in community like we're doing this evening, in a respectful way to talk about the issues, not about one party or the other, or what your position is on one side or the other for an issue, but just really to converse. So I agree that I think we need to codify bringing civics back into our schools. We do engage with a number of educational institutions in Northeast Ohio. Right now, one of my colleagues has co-created a curriculum for a class at Tri-C. We're also working with the Hawken Mastery School. We've worked with a myriad of teachers at CMSD. I do want to elevate one particular teacher who facilitates the Civics 2.0 program at CMSD. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to serve as a table facilitator, where essentially I was working with the students to co-create what their basically pitch would be to their classmates, right? So they're in this program, but they represent a small percentage of the CMSD high school students specifically. And we were just talking about different strategies, and clearly there's a generational difference in how we would approach things. So when I'm like, oh, get on the Facebook, and they're like, no, Miss Anthony, they're like, we're gonna get on TikTok. I'm like, okay, cool. So I think leading with authenticity, right? And it was very educational for me because I am not of the 17 or 16-year-old demographic. So I think as much as Crystal was noting, partnering, but also empowering youth to lead in how they engage.
Mm-hmm. And we will be turning over to questions pretty soon, so keep thinking about what you might want to bring to this conversation if you're joining us on live stream or on the radio. You can text your questions to 216-307-5632. That's 216-307-5632. Before we go to questions, Aaron, I did want to ask you about what the environment has been like for election workers this year. Our State House Bureau Chief at IdeaStream, Karen Kassler, she reported that local election workers have been inundated with records requests. People who believe the falsehood that the 2020 election was somehow stolen, and they want to see the balance. How are workers dealing with that, and how are they trying to help people understand that the election was conducted fairly?
So no one wants to hear their public employees complain about how they're overworked or underpaid, right? Let's start with that premise. But it has been a challenging year for election officials in Ohio and around the country. We have been dealing with, in addition to the redistricting situation and the 3 statewide elections that we've had this year, which again, we've just kind of been going, kind of the mouse on the treadmill, the hamster on the wheel, I guess, this year. But on top of that, you throw in the misinformation, the disinformation, the phone calls we get, questioning the results of 2020 or another election, the misinformation about, machines being rigged or hooked up to the internet, or all these things that are just, we're happy to educate the public, but it's definitely, it just takes time to do that and to educate the public, and it's been a really challenging year in that regard. And then these public records requests you mentioned, Nick, have definitely thrown a little bit of a wrench into the works. I mean, the board in Cuyahoga County, I think, is getting 2 to 5 a day sometimes, and these aren't like, can you please give me one piece of paper. These are hundreds of thousands of documents that they are requesting. So we are absolutely delighted to fill those requests. We want to be transparent. That's the hallmark of our democracy, is that you do have the right to this information. But certainly coming in 47 days before the election creates its own challenges.
And people may not know, you mentioned voting machines, for instance. Voting machines, tabulation machines, they're not supposed to be connected to the internet. They're not connected to the web. In boards of elections, you have Democrats and Republicans working together every step of the way. So you've got bipartisan pairs of eyes on everything that goes on, from working the polls to counting the votes?
We do. I liken it is, if you go to the front desk at the Board of Elections, you're going to see a Republican and a Democrat there to greet you. We have a Republican and a Democrat director and deputy director. Our board is 4 members, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. It is an absolute hallmark of our election system in Ohio that we be bipartisan. I always say, there are certain rooms within the boards of elections that are very secure, very safe, to the point that you need 2 keys. You need a Republican key and a Democrat key to get into where the ballots are counted. So imagine that movie, The Hunt for Red October, when they're launching the nuclear missiles, and they have to stick the keys in at the same time and turn. That's kind of what it's like at the Board of Elections. I mean, there are rooms that are like Fort Knox, and we're just not going to allow anyone to wander in and look at ballots or look at where we count ballots. You really need that bipartisan team to even get into some of those places.
Because we've got a little bit of time before we go to questions, I wanted to ask, how is the search for poll workers going?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to answer that because I think it is timely. With this forum tonight, we really rely on our community partners to help us. We do a lot of recruiting at the Board of Elections, but there's one program in particular I wanted to mention, and it's Work the Day, Share the Pay. So for any nonprofit that is sponsoring this, or to our folks here on the panel, if you are able to recruit poll workers for us and ask them to then donate their pay for the day to your organization, that's a great way to raise funds for your organizations, for your nonprofits. It's a great way to get people to work the polls. We would be delighted to talk to you at the Board of Elections about those opportunities. So thanks for mentioning that. We're doing well. We always need more, and we really do rely on our community partners to help with that.
Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists. We're now opening this conversation to our community. Again, if you would like to join this conversation, you can text your questions to 216-307-5632, 216-307-5632, and Alicia Ellis will be here to bring questions to the group.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for the amazing conversation thus far. We have some community questions coming in. One is, are there any plans to hold accountable the members of the Redistricting Commission who ignore the will of the voters?
And that goes to our state representative.
So, well, the great thing about everybody that was on the Redistricting Commission, they are up for re-election. So I say one way to hold them accountable is to not vote for them. And so that's one way, but they were put in contempt of court through the Supreme Court, and that fell through. And so I just say that people have to just keep pressing the issue. One thing we don't hear enough from, and I'll just say even from my office and even when I talk to my colleagues, the feedback is becoming less and less within our communities. So we need people to contact those who were on the Redistricting Commission, like the Speaker of the House, whose email is rep04@ohiohouse.gov. Contact him. Please let him know what your frustration is. And also make sure you let the Senate President your frustration. So letting people know that is one way to let it be known, but yeah, it's not much going on. So vote.
Thank you very much for the question. Do we have another one?
Yeah, definitely. Kind of second back off of that, do you feel like a petition for voters, like to hold folks accountable, would be worthy in a sense of an amendment to the Constitution in that case?
Juanita, we can start with you and have others join in.
So I think there has been talk about putting a ballot initiative on. I say when people are thinking about that, one, you have to think about the cost of how much that would be. We're looking at least $2 million. I always like to start off with the amount of money it costs just to do that and the amount of signatures that you would need to have it. I think that would be effective if the people say, like, we want an independent commission or we want the commission to look a lot different. That could be something that could be done. And then that would actually come on, if the signatures were done in a timely manner, that would be on November's ballot of next year.
We've had questions so far asking about the members of the Redistricting Commission and whether a ballot issue could be put on the ballot to change the process again. Do we have another question from our audience?
Yes, definitely. So as it relates to Cuyahoga County, the turnout has decreased over the years, right? So this year the turnout was 10%. What can we do in Cuyahoga County in particular to change that figure?
Erica?
Yeah, happy to take that question. Thank you. Well, I think one, it has to be contextualized. Earlier in the forum, we talked about the challenge with the multiple primary elections this year. So I know particularly the August primary election had a very low voter turnout. And part of that was, talking to folks before and after. They're like, what's happening in August, right? And so just really, contextualizing what is happening, not just on election day, but what is surrounding, the misinformation and disinformation that we've talked about throughout this evening. But I think aside from this year, and not to say that this year is not unique in that case, of course, Aaron just talked about the fact that we had 2 primaries. But I think we need to take a step back and really think about who and how are we seeking to engage people. We're a nonpartisan organization, so that's the orientation that I'm coming from. Understanding that the process of voter engagement or even civic participation doesn't start 3 months out before the election or a month before the election. We elevate GOTV in October, and we should continue to do that. But democracy shows up in your life every single day. So just as Rep. Brent was talking about knocking on doors and conversing, engaging in conversation with folks, that's our approach. And that is how we recommend folks to engage so that it doesn't feel transactional, but it feels transformative, right? So when there is frustration about the state of housing, the state of education, the state of transportation, we have to create space to really dialogue and converse about where and how you can activate about that. And it may not be on your ballot only, right? That may be one place that you can activate, but you could go to a public meeting. You could go to your city council or your county council. So really having a full, sort of holistic picture of what civic participation and voting looks like, I think will continue to increase folks' interest and their activation around actual election days.
Yeah, and I would say just off of that, I mean, one of my favorite things as a reporter sometimes is sitting in public meetings and hearing the public comment. I remember even, small East Cleveland, very small council chambers, people come up with their public comments and, very specific things. There's a pothole on this street. We paid to fill it ourselves because the city wouldn't do it. What are we going to do about this? And you can really hear the actual on the ground issues that people are dealing with.
Yeah, and shout out to folks like Clevelanders for Public Comment that made public comment, at least in the city of Cleveland, available last year, or participatory budgeting. Cleveland, also another effort here in our community that is creating vehicles for folks to be engaged in different ways that also aligns and obviously encourages folks to cast their ballot.
Great, we have another question?
Yeah, so I believe each of you mentioned about the mis and disinformation of what's happening here. So in regards to where can people find information about the new district boundaries and where their polls are located in their communities?
I always tell people to go straight to the County Board of Elections website. And if you go on there and you go underneath the tab, literally there's a tab at the top that says voter. It'll ask you for your last name, your birthday, and then as soon as you put that information in, it will tell you your polling location and the district, like your congressional district, your House district, your Senate district. It'll tell you that information, and also the next time you're able to go vote. There's also another option on the Board of Elections website that says maps and data. And when you go on there, you can see each map. Like you can see what the House district that I live in, which is House District 22, and all the cities that are part of that. So the Board of Elections, shout out to them. They do a great job of breaking that all down. And that's information you don't have to pay for. You just have to go on the website and look it up. So it's accessible to everyone.
That actually just reminded me, I introduced you, Representative Brent, saying you're representing District 12. Is that your old district?
I'm currently the state representative for House District 12. I'm running for a district that's House District 22. It's
There you
fine.
go. But so people may be confused and say, hey, why the numbers change even though my representative is the same?
Yeah, so if you go to House District 12 starting January 1st, you will be in Franklin County. And how the numbers occur, it depends on where they start drawing the districts. So they start off with the most populous county, which Cuyahoga County is not the most populous county anymore. So normally we are, so you normally will start with Cuyahoga County and then start to Franklin County. We went from Franklin County to Cuyahoga County, so that's why I've gone from 12 to 22.
That's good to know.
So in regards to voter registration, that's a top priority here. Do you feel like it's more about registering people to vote or the issue about getting people to actually show up?
Crystal, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I think it's a little bit of both. I think what it sparks to get people registered it's educational, it's motivating, it's engagement. But then again, that's why Erica talked about having a plan. You may have the best intention, you may desire to actually do it, but to get there within the day-to-day activities of the average citizen, it doesn't always happen, and it's not because of lack of motivation. Sometimes you're really pressed. You may not have a car, your vehicle could break down, you may not have a babysitter. There are tons of things that happens to the average person that we just simply do not consider. And so I think voter registration is equally important, but how we do get out to vote efforts, extending that additional hand, making sure you function as a collaborative, reaching out to your neighbors is equally as important when driving this initiative, and really pushing the idea of having a plan. That's really serious. Like I have like 4 jobs. And I'm a single mom, right? So when I think about those things about voting, I've always been one who I vote at home, or what we call vote by mail, because that's the easiest way. Or sometimes I go down because I have a whole 3 weeks now. Like Erica said, you literally can get in and out of the Board of Elections in 3 minutes. But if you wait until the day of or the day before, you're going to see this really lengthy line. You may not have time. It may be really bad traffic. So I think both are equally important, but just making sure that you understand people are well intended, but you have to have that plan, and make sure you lean on your community to get out to vote, because without the actual vote, the intent kind of means nothing, and you end up with a lot of things you don't want to see.
And there's something that just came to mind, Aaron, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, just a random point about voting by mail. In some states, as we saw in 2020, the vote by mail ballots aren't counted until after the election, which is why people had to wait to hear results. In Ohio, those votes are being tabulated before then, right? They're being scanned and gotten ready so that we have that result right away.
Yeah, they're being processed before the election.
Right.
Yeah,
tabulation happens after.
Correct. Yeah, we wait until 7:30, but you're exactly right, Nick. Fortunately, we do have a good law in Ohio as it relates to our absentee ballots. So when you mail them in, we will prepare them, we will open them, we will actually send them through the scanner. However, back to that whole double lock and key, it's in a computer that is completely locked up and safe. You know, you need an R and a D to go in and say, well, Representative Brent voted early. How did she, did that, can you tell how she voted? No, you can't. We wait until 7:30 p.m. on Election Day, but those are absolutely the first ballots. Those first results that you see on the county website or the Secretary of State's website, those are all those ballots that we've had in through the mail throughout the 28-day period.
Great, thank you. Go to the next question.
What can people do to be prepared to vote and know what's on the ballot for November 8th?
Erica, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to take that. I think we've a couple times touted our lovely Board of Elections. So really encourage people, as Representative Brent said, you can go to the Voters tab at the top of the browser and download your actual sample ballot after you put in your basic name, first name, last name, and then your date of birth. So that's the best way to have that. To be able to do your research for the issues or the candidates that will be on that particular ballot. That's incredibly important. And then, of course, checking other research sites in order to be informed. We have our local media that may be covering different topics depending on the election year. But I really, really encourage people to download that sample ballot so they're prepared when they get to the polls.
Right.
So what is this is complicated here, but what is the right balance of power between the Cuyahoga County Council and Cuyahoga, the county executive, and how is it outlined in the charter versus in practice?
Wow, that's very
That is
specific.
not a question to me.
Who wants to take a stab at that one?
I could at least give it a shot. I don't know about be able to
Crystal.
answer specifically what they're asking for. As a former county employee for 18 years, someone recently asked or tried to attempt to answer on this panel, like, what does an executive do? And so the executive is the equivalent on a federal level of your president, on the municipal level of your mayor. And so what is county council? Well, that's the equivalent or balance of your Congress at a federal level, your General Assembly at a state. So it has to be a system of checks and power. The executive is there as your president to be able to, he'll have his own budget, but he'll also bring in chiefs and administrators who oversee the day-to-day operations over everything you do for your countywide agencies. Your Children Family Services, your Office of Reentry, your Office of Community Development and Economic Development. And those directors have their own budget. They decide how they want to allocate funds and programming within the great county of Cuyahoga. Your council is a check So there's not too much power between any branch of government, just like Congress. And so they have to approve your budget. You have to be accountable as division directors to them and explaining what your budget is, what type of programming will go out, if you need additional resources and allocations, or if something is not quite going right and you need some additional support as a division head. That's generally what they are there for. So it's a system of checks and balances, just like it is on a federal and municipal level. That structure is just a little bit new or different within the state of Ohio. We are only one of 2 counties that operate in that way.
Nailed it. That was great.
Oh, whoop, whoop.
Very impressive.
Took us back to elementary, right? On some of those. With that being said, is there other suggestions from the panelists in regards to how to get people out to vote?
I mean, I can start again. I think I, with the exception of this wonderful gentleman who I just met today, I work very, very closely with these young ladies. And so I think what happens sometimes is that people are looking for this magic wand or magic stick. You only want to support something in the presidential election or because now there's a governor's race. Civic engagement is year round. If it's significant to you, put your money where your mouth is. Right? Like get out there and get involved, get engaged, and be very intentional about what it is that you do. And so when I say that, I've had maybe, the NAACP has had maybe 4 or 5 events within the last 2 or 3 months. I've had State Rep Brent speak at each one. And they're very different events. And the idea here is that you're connecting legislation to your everyday life in every aspect. So one was about an accountability roundtable after Floyd's murder, and what can our community do for their commitment to equity. She was able to speak to that and what they do at the legislative level. We had a wealth building symposium on Friday. She was able to speak to that and what that means on a legislative level. There's nothing that you do that the ballot is not involved in it, from your potholes on down. And so making sure we continuously get that in front of our constituency, explaining it in the layman's terms and understanding what they have the power to control and what it means to them and giving them tangible information to take back to spread across their community is one way. But there is no magic bullet and you need to do it all the time if it really is that important to you.
I'd just like to add on to, there was a bill that I co-sponsor that would make Election Day a public holiday for everyone, and it's never received a hearing. Shout out to Rep. Bride Rose Sweeney, who's the author of that bill. But I have relatives who live in Europe, and in Europe, everything is shut down on the day of the election. The stores are not open at all, like nothing. Everybody's off for that day, and everybody's expected to go vote. We need to take voting that seriously, that we just make sure there's no excuses, and that the only thing that's going on that day is voting. We need to really take that very seriously in Ohio, because it's easy for people, and I hear this all the time, like I got busy with life and I didn't go vote, even though people are given the opportunity to go vote within 30 days. So you don't just have that one day, you actually have 30 days, but we need to have it as a public holiday, because the way we have the lack of funding for public transit, the way we have access to just trying to navigate going from one job to another job, because we're looking at people who have more, they're working, but they're not getting paid much, and they're going amongst multiple jobs. And just living life, like, it's stressful out here. We need as little distractions as possible to get people out to vote. And then also make things a lot easier. There was also a bill that I just had an interest party meeting to make sure that when people are renting their apartment, that their voter information automatically changes with their lease. And so there's not doing a 2-part system, because before I lived in a house, I lived in an apartment, and every time your rent goes up, you're looking for a different apartment. But then you also need to make sure that your voting information updates itself too. So just trying to see, like, what does that look like to make sure that people are registering every time they move into these different rental places. So we have to just make sure that voting is accessible, and people don't have to be looking for us, but we're looking for them.
And if I can add,
Sure.
I think there's layers to GOTV. There's the individual, the institution, and the community level. As an institution within the ecosystem of democracy building here, people are like, what do we do? What do we do? I'm like, what you gonna do, right? Like, we are one organization of 5 full-time people in a city with nearly 400,000 residents, right? So really thinking about what you can do, and I think sometimes people think it has to be the big grandiose thing, right? It can be as simple as, being COVID safe and all that, sitting in the backyard with your neighbors, writing cards, reminding your neighbors to vote, or coming down to the Board of Election and picking up some voter registration cards, right? It can be done on an individual level. Shoot, you can start with your family, right? Make sure your mama, your brother, your sister, and all that is registered. And, obviously you have institutions like Cleveland Votes. We have 23 grantees that are activating the community. But then there's institutional ways, right, that Representative Brent is talking about. How do we codify these practices so that it's not by choice, right? So you have corporate employers that, could make Election Day a free PTO day so that their employees can go either work the polls or volunteer, for candidates obviously on their own time. So there's different ways that we can codify in a systematic way so that there is not these layers of burdens, but we really have to think about it in those 3 layers.
Thank you very much. Do we have other questions?
Yes, so this one's directly to you, Representative. In the sense of the redistricting, right? How has your district changed, and how are you addressing the challenges and the change with your colleagues?
So 90% of my district is brand new, and the State House, if the elections go as I predict, there will be extremes on both sides. And I always like to specify on both sides there will be extremes. And I live in a very polarized time where I'm spending time all across the state getting to know people who right now, some of them don't have opponents in the general election, so I know I'm gonna have to work with them. And so just getting to know people's priorities, and some people came here with an agenda that's not here for the people. Some people do have agendas that's here for the people, but I still have to work with everyone. So it's one day at a time, and I always have to remember I need so many votes to pass something. So I'm like, are you going to be that person that I can get that vote for that bill to get things done?
Great. So another question here is, due to the recent announcement of debates for governor and Senate being canceled, how can voters find out more about where candidates stand on important issues?
I'm happy to take
Sure,
that
Erica.
one. I do want to acknowledge and shout out the Ohio Debate Commission that was leading the effort to organize those debates. I think earlier Crystal was talking about some old school ways, door knocking, canvassing, things of that nature. There are many tools in the toolbox of democracy building, and debates is a tried and true one. The Debate Commission and many folks that helped to make that happen created the institution to ensure that there was fair and equitable access to information for voters, right? You can go to a website, but the reality is the website's biased. It's your website. If you're the candidate running, you're not going to put lies on your own website. You're not going to put misinformation on your own website. So we want to be able to have, discursive dialogue, and hear information from our candidates. I'm so excited to see the scorecard that the NACP here is going to be producing. So I think it's incredibly disappointing. I will say through an email exchange with my team today, when I shared the information with them, they were like, wait, this is not mandatory? I said, no, it is not mandatory, right? So, even us, we're actively learning constantly, about, the ways in which democracy works. But yes, you can go to the website, but, definitely encourage you to check out some other nonpartisan sources like Crystal and the NACP scorecard. When that comes out, there's different judicial research and sort of fact-based information where people can go to learn information. A simple Google search, right? See what the person was doing before they started running for office, and whether they were working a particular job or they held another form of office. But again, I think going back to Representative Brent's point, it's a laborious task, right? We're not making it easy for folks. It's not like go to this one website and you can, get all the gain all the access and information to what you need. So we do make it complicated, but we are fortunate that we have the power of the internet, and Google is our friend.
Great. Anyone else want to respond to that one?
Twitter never dies. So
That's another one.
I don't care what you say, things that, I've been on Facebook since when I was young. I was one of those original Facebookers when I started when I was in school. So social media never dies, and look at what people have said in the past. Even if you have to dig up 5 or 6 years, you can almost Google the person's name with a certain topic to see if anything of relevance comes up with that person. Try to do that where people's past jobs do matter. If you are an environmental, person, and they do something they've worked for a company that's against your standards, then those are red flags. So it is a disservice that there are no debates, but Google and social media is your friend. Use it.
And at least on the local level, if you go to community meetings, ward club meetings, other organizations that might have summer events, early fall events, candidates will show up because they want to get your vote. They want to say hello to you, and you might have a chance to talk one-on-one with them.
Awesome. I think this is our last question. Can anyone speak more to the two ballot measures that will appear on the November ballot?
Oh, issue 1 and issue 2. The first issue will, and I'm gonna act like Aaron's not here. One of the issues, I like to call it a voter suppression bill. It will take away the rights of allowing 17-year-olds to be able to vote in this election. It also will take away a community's ability to say that non-citizens will be able to vote. Right now, a municipality can say that non-citizens can be able to vote in local issues, particularly when it comes to like if there's a school levy or things about a liquor license passing within a certain precinct, very local issues only. This issue will get rid of all those things. And then issue 2 is regarding the bail reform, and I use that word very loosely. It will allow judges to consider public safety as a factor when it comes to bail reform. I'm trying to be as non-biased as possible. Work with me, people.
You're doing great.
Thank you very much. If that was the last question, I know we've got a little bit of time here before we wrap things up. So I'd love to, start to get some final thoughts from everyone as you're thinking about these last 47 days or so. We could start with you, Erica. Last messages you think you want to get out to voters.
Yeah, I think going back to my point about make a plan, we can't predict what's going to happen in the future, so really being proactive and making a plan for yourself. Secondly, really again thinking about your own individual accountability. We all have to contribute to the social fabric of our community, so whether it's specifically, engaging in volunteering at the polls as an example or with another nonprofit, just think about your own accountability. And again, it doesn't have to be the big grandiose plan. You may only be able to commit to once a month, once a quarter, but that is additive to the collective efforts that are happening in our communities. And then I think lastly, and most importantly, always be an advocate for yourself. At the end of the day, as Representative Brent said, the elected officials that are working within our state at the different at the state and local level are working on our behalf. And it's really important from an accountability standpoint that we create mechanisms like the Accountability Summit that NACP had a couple months ago, and that we own and have agency to understand that we can affect change even at the individual level. Pick up that phone, send an email, write a letter. I know they love it. As a former lobbyist, I did it often. But again, it's about the individual accountability for yourself and really the agency to affect change.
Representative Brent, any last thoughts?
Thank you. You matter, no matter if you are 2 years old or you're 100 years old. You matter, and so does your voice. Show up. If there's an opportunity for public comment or to come to give a testimony, make sure you do that. Do not let barriers stop you. To get on the Greyhound bus to get to the State House from Cleveland to Columbus is $16. So if you want to come and testify and tell us your opinion on something, please do that. If you want to scare an elected official, show up, because that is the only way that they're going to know that people are concerned about what's going on. So you value so much, and if you really want to see change, you have to be consistent and persistent to make sure that happens.
Thank you very much, Crystal.
I would just say, ditto what my sisters have said, but also just understand what your own values are and have some level of self-awareness about what you value, what you would like to see, and understand what each elected official can actually do for you in their particular role and what you can demand. One thing the State Rep Brent is excellent at is telling you where to show up to actually meet with your elected officials. The quiet coffee places that you just happen to run into them. And also understand, like she said, you are technically their boss. Don't ever be in fear to ask for what it is you want or to engage with another human being about what you desire. A simple conversation can change the world. So, make sure you educate yourself, understand what they absolutely can do for you, and understand how to activate and speak to them one-on-one to educate them, because they actually may not know.
Thank you very much. And Aaron, anything else you want to share with us?
Sure. We have a very safe, secure, accessible, and robust election system here in Ohio and a way of voting. We're very proud of it. Your boards of elections work very hard to make sure that it is that way, and we want you to vote. So please, if you go to Twitter and you're checking out candidates, that's a great place to do that. If you're reading weird things about the election system, it's probably not a good source for finding out how our elections operate. So call your boards of elections, call your elected officials if you have questions. But please show up and vote. We work really hard to make sure we have a good system, and we want you to come out.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. I really appreciate your making the time to be with us tonight. And of course, the November 8th election is coming up soon. You still have an opportunity to check to see if you're registered to vote. You've got a chance to register to vote too. And early voting is coming up soon, so you can get in early. You can request a vote by mail ballot. You can go on election day. Lots of other opportunities to make sure that your voice is heard in this upcoming election. Thank you again to all of our partners, and thank you to our audience for joining us. To close things out, I'll turn things over to Helen Forbes Fields, the President and CEO of YWCA Greater Cleveland.
Thank you, Nick, for moderating this evening's discussion. And thank you to our signature sponsor, Rockwell Automation, as well as our community partners for their support. We also want to thank Ideal Stream Public Media, the City Club of Cleveland, and WOVU 95.9 FM. And last but certainly not least, we thank all of our panelists and audience members for joining us on our mission to encourage engagement and dialogue, as well as advance an understanding of this important topic of voting rights. Our next panel discussion will be held on November 17th, and we urge everyone to please join us by registering through the United Way's website at unitedwaycleveland.org. Click on the events link, and it will take you to the registration page. Registration is complimentary and open to all. These conversations are so important for moving our community forward towards a more equitable future. On behalf of the YWCA Greater Cleveland and United Way Greater Cleveland, thank you for being with us tonight, and please have a wonderful evening. Good night.